My very first trip to Nepal was quite an adventure. I was about 31, this was 2001, and I hadn't really traveled outside the country much. In my 20s, I traveled a lot, but I traveled around to national parks around the USA and places like that, and had been up to Vancouver and places like that, but had not been overseas much. I traveled to Europe a few times for the company that I worked for in my 20s, but never anywhere exotic like Nepal. So I went at first specifically to collect the antique singing bowls. I had arranged to meet the main collector there, and had arranged to meet some other merchants there as well. My friend Karsang Lama, who has provided some of the wonderful paintings behind me from Dharmapala Tonka Center, and one of the carpet makers that I wanted to buy some carpets from, and some other artisans that I had arranged beforehand to meet. And so I traveled over there primarily for the singing bowls. But when I started Himalayan Bowls 25 years ago, I also started Buddha Offering, which no longer exists, but that was another company with all the other handicrafts that I imported from Nepal. So I got on the airplane at midnight in San Francisco, and it was about a 26, 28-hour journey altogether. I flew to Hong Kong and sat in the airport for a few hours, and then flew to Bangkok and spent the night in Bangkok. Saw my very first real Buddhist temples there, and then the National Palace as well. And then took that last flight from Bangkok to Kathmandu, which is a really interesting flight. It's like you're going to the end of the world and everybody is celebrating. It's not really like that anymore, but they used to come out with a bottle of cognac and give everybody a drink, and it was that kind of last leg of everybody's long journey wherever they came from. It was probably a long journey, and for many people they were going home to Nepal, and for others they were going to study Buddhism, or in the coming back from UN peacekeeping forces. That there are a lot of Nepalis who go and work overseas. So people had a lot to celebrate coming home or visiting a wonderful place like I was for the first time. And it had that real air on the airplane. And that spirit's kind of changed over the years, but back then it was really quite a fun thing that happened at the end of the flight. And so you land in the airport in Kathmandu is really quite a frightening landing too. It's you really just kind of come out of the mountains and land in what looks like a big grassy patch. The only airport I've flown out of that is more kind of scary when you're flying in or out is the one in Arcata, California, that flies off of a cliff into the ocean. When you take off, it's as if you're flying right into the ocean, because it literally goes off of this seaside cliff there on the Redwood Coast, where I went to grad school years ago. So I arrived and went to my hotel. You know, they were there waiting for me with the car, and actually my friend's brother picked me up, and we didn't even go to the hotel at first. We actually went right to business and went to his office and looked at some singing bowls right from the airport, and he took me around to some other places, to crystal shops, and we went and had some tea and talked for a little while. And then I eventually made it back to my hotel and checked in and went in for a shower. It'd been now, you know, a long dusty trip, also around Kathmandu in addition to the flight. So I went in, and at the bathroom, and if you've ever been to Asia, everywhere they give you flip-flops. They give you, you know, the plasticky flip-flop sandals at the entrance of the bathroom. And they do that in Nepal. and they're always too small for my feet. My feet aren't that big, but these are always really small sizes. And so, sure enough, they didn't fit me, and I thought, well, what do I need those for anyway? So I went in, took a shower, and came back out and relaxed in the room for a few minutes, and then got ready to go out to have dinner and just explore Kathmandu. It was my first day there. And before I went, I wanted to go and use the bathroom before I left. And then I realized why you need those flip-flops, because the way the bathrooms are built in Nepal, there's no separation for the shower. The shower is just the bathroom. There's just a spigot in the side of the wall, and there's a drain in the floor somewhere. And the whole bathroom then becomes your shower. And so the floor was wet, and I kind of squeezed into those two small flip-flops so I didn't get my socks wet and could use the toilet before I went out. And I thought, well, my first stop then is I better go find some flip-flops in my size so that I can take a shower and not have to wait all day to then use the bathroom after I get the floor wet. So I had a little bit of a mission right from from the outset there. So that's what I did. I went out and just picked a direction. Where I stayed is on the edge of Tamil, which is kind of the tourist district. And I stay either in Tamil. I don't stay there anymore. I stay in Bodhanath whenever I go for the last several years. But my first few trips, I would kind of flip-flop between Tamil and Bodha. Tamil is a little bit more convenient for working. Bodha is much where I prefer to be and where the monasteries are and where my friends live. So I walked out and just picked a direction, and where I stayed there is on the edge of Tamil called Chhatrapati. It's a roundabout. So there's a little roundabout road with spikes going in every direction. And every day I would pick a new direction. And this first trip, I'd pick the direction, kind of the first street after the main street to Tamil, if you know Kathmandu. You know, you come in the main, this is the back way to Tamil, so not the main gate to Tamil, but if you did the big L and went out the other side of Tamil, like you were going to Durbar Square, for example, I'm more on that side. So the first spoke after that road, and I go out and within a minute or two, find flip-flops, find a shop that's got a kind of it's almost like a rack from greeting cards is what I think it was, like an old spin rack from greeting cards. And it had flip-flops all over it. And so I found, I think it was the only pair of like, you know, size 10 or 11 flip-flops, large size for them, super large. And I got those and stuck them in my little backpack and just kept walking down that road. And just had a feeling there's more I want to see down here. And I kept going, and after a little bit came to a place called, I think it's called Sri Ga. And it's a small stupa with a lot of statuary around it and a small monastery there, which at that time was just being built. I've been back many times since, and that temple and monastery have been going now for years. But my first trip there was under construction, that building, and it was interesting to see that part too. I could see the construction happening. And it's a beautiful little square full of pigeons and just a few local people making offerings around these. A lot of them are replacement statues. A lot of the statues were like around Asia were looted and have been, you know, subsequently replaced with replicas. The real ones are also there, and they're locked up behind kind of metal cages. They're locked up behind bars so that nobody can take the original statues. So if you go to Nepal and some other places and you see statues just out in the open, they're likely replicas of statues that were there, or just replacements. May not be the exact thing that was there before. And the real ones are generally now have to be protected. So that was the case there. And they also have a really interesting thing that wasn't protected that I could ring, which is a beautiful old bell. And this is typical Nepali temple bell, which looks rather like a small church bell and have a wonderful, unique sound that is really beautiful. And it's actually the same metal that the singing bowls are made of. And this one, I would guess, is probably 12th, 14th century, really nice older bell that's still there. The really dark color. There might be a picture of it in my book, actually, of that. There's a picture of a hanging bell, not the giant bell. That's another story. The giant bell in Bodh with the writing all over it, the Tibetan script all over it. That's in Bodhanath. This is a small one. There's like a picture of a small black bell. That's this bell. And I took that picture on this very first day that I visited. And so I paid my respects and did some circles around the stupa and visited all of the shrines and eventually made my way back to the hotel. And it was a really very nice first day outing. And then the next morning, I woke up before dawn. I woke up, it was still dark outside. And the first thing you hear in Nepal are the crows. You hear the crows starting to make noise. And then you hear a few bells in the distance. And then you start to hear the rumbling of trucks and cars going. And by the time there's any light in the sky, you start to hear a real commotion. You can even hear people talking and yelling in the street, and all the cars beeping their horns and everything. And it's really interesting experience to go from sunrise to light, because not only is the light increasing, but the sound is increasing. And of course, for me, that was endlessly fascinating. Now go out on the rooftop of the hotel and listen to that in the morning. But not my first morning. My very first morning, after using my flip-flops, I went out before dawn, and I had a little headlamp, and I had my camera, and took some snacks and a bottle of water, since I didn't know when I would be back. And I went out when it was still dark, and I picked a different direction on the spoke and just started walking down this street very confidently in full blackness. This is a residential street. The shop houses in Nepal that are about 1,000 years old. A lot of stuff is about that old in Nepal, 800,000 years old. And they are a shop on the bottom floor, which have kind of wood shutters that close the whole front of the shop. And then the upper floors are the living quarters. There are flats. Each level is generally for a different generation. So, you know, the parents will live on one level, and maybe their siblings or their oldest kids will live on the next level. And then as it goes up, it's different generations. And as people get married and have kids, then they can, you know, some of these are pretty big houses. So they go up a few stories, and they had their business on the bottom floor, and then they could have a few generations living on the upper floors. And so I'm walking down this long row of these old shop houses in pitch black darkness, with just a few stray dogs roaming around. A lot of dogs over there, dogs and chickens and cows in the street. And I eventually found my way almost to Durbar Square, which is the old kind of center of Kathmandu. There's a lot of monuments there, a lot of pagodas and royal palaces, temples. There's I don't know if it's still standing or if it was one of the temples that was destroyed in the earthquake, but the one temple that had these massive drums up on the maybe third floor level or so, had these giant drums that must have been 12, 15 feet across, and also quite old, those drums. They were really cool. Anyway, that's not the story. the story is I walked down the road in the blackness, and eventually there started to be a little bit of light in the sky. And I was almost to Durbermarg, although I didn't know it because I was just kind of walking down the street in the dark. And I came to this little temple, and there were little butter lamps all around. The ladies were lighting the lamps and making offerings on leaves. So they had flowers and leaves, and they would put some offering materials in there, and I'm not sure what it was, rice or some pigment and some flowers, and they would put it there in the on the shrine and say their prayer, and the next person would come up and they would ring the bell. Again, it had one of those little hanging temple bells there. This was just a small shrine. It's almost like a walk-up shrine that they can open the gates on the front of it at dawn, and there's the statue right there and place for all the butter lamps and the offerings. And so I was just witnessing, just watching it, and they're chanting and ringing the bell, and I'm hearing other sounds around. It's all very, colorful sounding, and then the light is coming up, so I'm starting to see the colors of the clothing and the city start to come out of the darkness. And before I do, I found myself that I wasn't just watching, but I was in a line, that there were people behind me waiting. So I ended up being kind of the next to go up to the shrine, and I also rang the bell and said a little prayer and went on my way. And then the sun was coming up, and I found myself in Durbar Square, and I was glad I brought my water, and I could wander around Durbar Square and see the really interesting historic buildings there, like the old pagodas, which people don't know were invented in Nepal. Pagodas are associated with Japan and China and even Vietnam, and they were actually invented in Nepal, where the best artisans in the world ever lived. So the next morning I did wake up and go up on the roof and listen to the crows and the trucks and the car horns and the people talking down on the street as the sun came up, and just looked around from that vantage point. I had a really nice view around all of the tops of the buildings, and I could see way off in the distance Swayambhu Temple, the monkey temple, they call it, which is way up on a hill and really stands out. You can just see it from a distance. And I was quite a distance. It's a few miles from there, I think, 2 or 3 miles, I would guess. Just jutting out of the hillside in kind of the haze of the smog there. And so I was determined on my next free day to walk out there. And I was there for quite a while. This first trip, I think I stayed for 5 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And so I had, work in between, and I went to the monasteries and, had plenty of time to explore. So it was another day that I ended up walking from that same hotel all the way out to Swayambhunath, and it was much further than I thought. I didn't realize it was going to be such a long walk, and the weather started getting warmer by the time I got there, and my friends told me, watch out for the monkeys, be careful, the monkeys can bite people. So I was expecting kind of, a wild scene with the monkeys. And sure enough, you walk up this long, long stairway. It may be the longest stairway I've ever seen. I don't know. I've seen some other really long stairways also at temples. I've never been to that super long stairway in China, but this one in Swayambhunath is pretty good. It's a pretty 10-minute walk up the stairs, something like that, which if you've never walked a lot of stairs, it's it's like hiking straight up a hill. You're just walking and walking and walking with monkeys and people with bananas to give to the monkeys to leave as offerings, which end up being monkey treats. And other offerings and people carrying things up the hill there, uh, along with the monkeys trying to steal it from them as they go. So went up there, and there was there's a Tibetan monastery and a lot of Hindu shrines as well. So it's an interesting place because it's a mix. It's considered a holy site by Hindus and Buddhists. Like I think all of the sites in Nepal actually are considered holy sites by both Hindus and Buddhists. In Swayambanath and Pashupatinath, you really see the mix. You really see them juxtaposed right next to each other, which is kind of interesting. We've got the Tibetan monastery over here, and we've got the Hindu guys over here chanting and playing the drums, and got to experience that again. And the first shrine I was at, by the way, and the Dawn shrine that I went to, that's a Hindu shrine. And Hinduism is the national religion in Nepal, so most people are Hindu there. And then most of the Buddhists are in certain areas. There are some around Swayambanath there, and most are over in Bodhanath. But of course, everybody lives everywhere in Nepal because it's a pretty free society. But people do tend to stick in their neighborhoods. So I made it to the top there, and rather than attack me, one of the monkeys actually bowed to me. This big male monkey walked right up to me and just kind of bowed. I thought that was the funniest thing. So I didn't have any kind of tension with the monkeys. They were my buddies, and I didn't have any food for them. I don't think, but I listened to the chanting for a little while and made my way back down. And my other trips around Tamil, I did another one of those spokes, and one day just got terribly lost. That spoke of that Chhatrapati didn't really lead anywhere. It got me terribly lost. I was walking, I must have walked halfway to Boda. I don't know if it was halfway, but going to Boda is about a 30-minute drive from Tamil there. And I might have walked halfway and just couldn't find my way and couldn't find a taxi. The only thing you can do in that situation is get in a taxi, because I asked a couple of shopkeepers and a couple of people on the street and couldn't get a real answer. You know, even if they could tell me exactly where it was, I wasn't really going to find it in this maze of local roads. So I was really beyond help. A couple of people did point my way, but I really needed to find a taxi to just say, take me back to Tamil. And I eventually did, but I had walked my feet off so much by then, and eventually got in the taxi and made my way back to the hotel. The taxis in Nepal are something in themselves. They're the little Tata car from India. So you're in this, really, it's like being in a tin can. It's just such a lightweight thing. When you close the door, it's kind of like, is that a car door? It has no weight to it at all. And they really drive incredibly dangerously there. They're just careening around and beeping the horn and pushing their way into traffic. And so that's a whole experience in itself. Not nearly as bad as having to get on the back of a motorbike, though, which I had to do too, as well. One of my other trips, not my first trip to Nepal, but I'll throw in a bonus story here. One of my trips, I went out to Boda. I don't remember if I was going to look at statues or Tonka paintings or what I was doing out there, maybe just going to the monastery. But I spent the day out in Bodhanath and was staying in Tamil. And my friend offered to give me a ride. And so it's actually my main supplier's brother offered to give me a ride. And so I said, okay. And I waited, and he showed up on his motorcycle. And I said, you know, I don't get on the back of a bike. What are you doing? I only drive in cars. I never get on motorcycles, especially in Kathmandu. And he said, oh, Joseph, I'm so sorry, but the traffic's very bad today. There's no way we can go by car. And so I thought for a minute, you know, should I should I go with him on the bike or should I just get in a taxi? And I looked, and it was just gridlock on the road, and it was rush hour. It might have taken me, 2 or 3 hours to get back, which is normally a half an hour drive in the car. By a bike, it's less, of course. So I got on the back of the bike and asked him to please go slowly, and he didn't. But we made it back okay, had a nice dinner, and that wasn't my first trip to Nepal, but all the other stories I shared were from my very first trip, and it's a magical place. It's the kind of experience that I didn't know what I was going to get into, but I had a feeling when I went down each of those roads that I would find something. And you always find something really, ancient and cultural and interesting there. And it's also like you're in this living place where if you follow your feeling, you're gonna go to the right place because there's this living pulse to the city that you're part of. And I hope that hasn't been lost. There's been a lot of changes there in recent years. They ripped up all the roads. They had a lot of damage from the earthquakes. There's a big tent city on the edge of the city now from all the people that came from the villages in the hills down to Kathmandu after the earthquakes, and there's a lot more strife and crime and problems there now than there were in the years that I was traveling there. And I hope when I've seen some recent videos actually and see that they've rebuilt a lot of Durbar Square, for example. And I hope that they can overcome some of the other challenges and retain the spirit of liveliness and faith and tradition and culture that they have so strongly there, because they not only make all of these beautiful handicrafts that you know me for, but they also are living that. They're living that mythology, living that way of thinking, way of believing, way of seeing the world. And it's really a unique thing. It's one of the last places where the ancient culture is really still in the majority of the area, where they're still kind of carrying their ancient traditions forward with very little alteration. And when I first started going, they were still wearing traditional dress, and that's largely a thing of the past now. Of course, that was just when cell phones were starting, when smartphones were starting, and now everybody has iPhones, and with the internet, everything has changed, even in Nepal. So things have definitely gradually changed, but you still have that spirit alive there, and you can still experience the authentic culture there, and the authentic religious training, authentic art training. You can watch the artisans do their thing or even learn how to do it yourself. You could still study in the monasteries with the monks, and you could still visit those temples at dawn and witness the sort of faithful prayer ceremonies like I did that first day.